U.S. President Donald Trump arrived in Japan on Sunday, his first stop on a whirlwind 12-day tour of Asia before he moves on to the ROK, or Republic of Korea, on Tuesday. Now, DPRK and trade talks are likely to top Trump's agenda throughout the tour. But how he gets on with the region's leaders is also likely to determine the success or failure of his trip, with possible global repercussions. Welcome to The Point. Live from Beijing, I'm Lu Xin. And to look at how the U.S. President fared during his first stop in Japan, joining me from Tokyo is Professor Takesato Watanabe, Professor Emeritus at the Doshisha University. In Singapore, we have Harry H. Sa, a senior analyst in the United States program at the Institute of Defense and Strategic Studies in Nanyang Technological University. And in the studio here in Beijing, I'm joined by Professor Yang Xiyu, a senior fellow at the China Institute of International Studies. Welcome to the show, gentlemen. Professor Watanabe, let me come to you first. Now, from the images coming out of the trip so far, President Trump and Prime Minister Abe seem to be really good buddies already. Some have even joked that President Trump is only stopping by in Japan to get in a round of golf with Abe. What is the main reason behind such a strong personal chemistry between the two?
Mr. Abe, as you know well, he is from the very rich family and also military family during the war. So he doesn't mind anything about the military matters are concerned. In case of the Mr. Trump, he doesn't know much about the politics. He knows only the business, and he does everything on the basis of military thinking and business thinking by the power. So like Mr. Abe, like Mr. Trump, in that sense, Mr. Kim Jong-un is in the same group by thinking, by way of thinking, I understand. So Mr. Trump thinks that if Mr. Abe joins his idea, he can become stronger when he visits China. This is the power structure in this case, I believe.
Now, President Trump said during his trip to Japan that the era of strategic patience on the issue of DPRK is over. Let's listen to this soundbite first.
Importantly, we're working to counter the dangerous aggressions of the regime in North Korea. The regime continued development of its unlawful weapons programs, including its illegal nuclear tests and outrageous launches of ballistic missiles directly over Japanese territory, are a threat to the civilized world and international peace and stability. We will not stand for that. The era of strategic patience is over. Some people said that my rhetoric is very strong, but look what's happened with very weak rhetoric over the last 25 years. Look where we are right now.
Mr. Sa, let me come to you. How do you interpret the sentence about the era of strategic patience being over? What do you think he's trying to say here?
Well, it's clear he's turning over a new leaf. He wants to break away from what the Obama administration has done for the past 8 years. He wants to start a sort of Trump era of diplomacy and engagement and a new policy towards North Korea. And so he wants to have it as different and as almost kind of like a Hollywood blockbuster kind of approach. Where he's really seen as this newcomer to Washington who's here to shake things up in what has been a failing policy towards North Korea. And so his rhetoric will be strong, and it will be very different from what we've been used to and familiar with in the past. And so we should expect more of the same. We are going to hear Trump explain how different his approach is towards North Korea. And he's going to make it as different as possible.
Professor Yang, how do you read this message coming out? Is it in line with what we have been hearing over the past months since he's been in office? You know, the line of very strong rhetoric and coupled with more military assets being amassed around the Korean Peninsula, or is he saying something different here?
Well, what he said in Tokyo is indeed along with what he has said during the past few months. And also, the new statement in Japan make a very clear signal to the world, especially to North Korea, say he will launch a new set of policies to the DPRK for U.S., for their allies, and for the region. And what different policy he will launch, I think basically that will contain some similarities with some differences. The so-called similarity means there won't be difference between Obama and the Trump administration, say, making pressures and sanctions against North Korea. Mm-hmm. The only difference between Obama and the Trump administration is the degree of the pressures, just like Trump administration has indicated, the so-called maximum pressures on DPRK. In other words, the strategic patience policy by Obama didn't reach the level or point of a maximum. So that's the difference, the degree difference. But the bigger difference between Trump and Obama is Obama's strategic patience policy basically didn't include the military options, but Trump does. So that is the big difference. And the bigger difference, say, military option really bring the issue in a more uncertain situation.
Mm-hmm. What is the role of Japan here? Now, Prime Minister Abe is expected to seek assurances from Trump of Washington's commitment to security in the volatile region of Asia-Pacific. After these 2 days in Japan, do you feel Prime Minister Abe's government can breathe any easier in this regard, Professor Yang?
Well, Abe actually has indicated by saying this, he supports the doctrine, say, all options on the table. That means he fully supports everything Trump administration will do or has done. That indicated that, number one, Japanese government will take a tougher position and tougher measures against the DPRK to coordinate with Trump maximum pressures. Mm-hmm. And number two, if there's something military happened, Japan will certainly be involved by varied means, by the so-called selective collective security doctrine, or by providing their support in logistic or intelligence area. So by all Japan can do under the current legal framework.
Well, that will be the position of the Japanese government. Professor Watanabe, what about the Japanese people faced with the biggest security threats since a long time? How do the ordinary people in Japan see Prime Minister Abe's alignment with Trump's fiery rhetoric and policies?
2 weeks ago, we had the lower house election, and LDP, led by Mr. Abe, got the overwhelming victory because he continued to say Japan is menaced by North Korea, and without the security of safe networking with the United States, Japan is put into difficulty to life or death. So he got the victory. However, after the election, there was a poll, more than 65% of the people, they want to have the negotiation with North Korea. So this is the big discrepancy between Mr. Abe's idea and also the result of the election. In like this, Mr. Abe is going just right after Mr. Trump all what he has to do in his idea is to say yes, yes, yes to Mr. Trump. Mr. Trump is the politician based on the business principle, as I said before. So those two are helping with each other. And Mr. Moon of the South Korea is a little different. He has a little friendly ideas to North Korea because both nations are named the Koreans and Korean Peninsula. So Abe and Trump, they are very cold to Asian people in a sense. So one thing I can say clearly is that the friendship given by the image of the two persons needs the necessity in front of the talks with Mr. Xi Jinping, President of China. So this is the power structure that Mr. Trump and Mr. Abe has in their mind.
Mr. Sa, in Singapore now, with Japanese citizens rehearsing drills in case of a nuclear attack, Tokyo will want to know the U.S. will provide military cooperation in times of a military conflict, and so also literally in the firing line of its northern neighbor with artillery positioned over the border will want the same. How much reassurance do you think Trump can provide these two nations? Can they really rely on the U.S.?
Well, I think the alliances are things that exist beyond the office of presidency. These are long-standing institutions that in many ways have taken a life of their own beyond what the president can influence or control. And so the strength of these alliances can ebb and flow depending on the attitudes of the president. We've seen the Japanese and Korean alliances with the United States come under heavy attack when Donald Trump was campaigning last year during the elections. And we still see a bulk of American security policy flowing through these alliances. And when it comes to North Korea, the White House is leaning heavily on these alliances. And so you don't see the kind of weakening that you expected. If anything, these alliances have become an even more important centerpiece of American security policy against North Korea in keeping peace in the region. And so having President Donald Trump in the region, even his rhetoric is still largely supportive of these alliances. He's very friendly with Shinzo Abe, and it almost seems like he forgot what kind of attitude he had against these alliances only 1 year ago. And so I don't see that the danger of these alliances crumbling or coming undone in the face of North Korean threat. I think that President Trump is doing what he can in his capacity to bolster and reassure the confidence of the Asian people in the region.
Yeah, well, that really brings the question to mind, what exactly is in the U.S. strategic interest, a stable Northeast Asia or a Northeast Asia that is in trouble and uncertainty? Professor Young, a report issued by the Congressional Research Service late last month estimated as many as 300,000 could die in the first few days of a conflict between the DPRK and the U.S., even without the use of nuclear weapons. Do you think President Trump is being reckless in goading the DPRK leader the way he does? What's behind his bellicose rhetoric, really?
Well, this question is really difficult, not for the public, not for you, for me, but difficult for Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un. Actually, we have been seeing a gambling game. Both of the leaders in Pyongyang and Washington, D.C. Looks like to launch a war at any cost, especially from Pyongyang. But I think both Pyongyang top leader and Washington top leader really concerned the result you mentioned. Say, are they or is he ready for the consequences by losing so huge population? I don't think both of them have been ready. But on one hand, they do want to play the blink-ban sheep against the other. But on the other hand, they are really preparing a war just in case. So that's why we are facing a very uncertain situation. No one can guarantee, say, no war at all. By the same token, war, certainly.
You have been watching The Point with me, Li Xin. We'll take a short break and we'll be back with this discussion. Don't go away. Welcome back. Now, there is increasing talk of a four-way mechanism involving the US, Japan, Australia and India. Before coming on the trip, President Trump has also been talking about a free and open Indo-Pacific, a notion that is very much in line with what Prime Minister Abe proposed for the region. Professor Yang, what are the considerations behind such a mechanism?
That reflects that Trump administration is reshaping American strategy towards this region. On one hand, enlarge the geopolitical coverage from Pacific to Indian Ocean. Say U.S. Strategy towards here will cover both of the great oceans. And on the other hand, that reflects Trump administration is actually continue Obama administration's strategy to this region. Say the core of the strategy is focus, make American strategic, global strategic focus on this region rather than Europe or Middle East. So that is the same with the Obama. The difference is the scope or coverage.
Now, Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe also announced during President Trump's visit additional sanction measures by Japan. Let's listen to this soundbite by Prime Minister Abe.
I have decided to take our own additional sanction measures in our effort to seek the solution of the nuclear missile and the most important abduction issues of North Korea. Tomorrow there will be a decision on freezing assets of 35 North Korean entities and individuals.
Professor Watanabe, how do you look at the timing of this move?
Mr. Abe is very emotionally controlling the Japanese people. Kidnapping is measurable. We must solve that question as soon as possible. However, Mr. Abe, took this issue with Mr. Trump. This means that he is strongly manipulating the feeling of the Japanese people. Of course, Mr. Kim Jong-un and his father and grandfather, they strongly, did cruel things against the Japanese ordinary people. This is wrong, completely wrong, but if we consider the peace order in the Pacific area and Indian Ocean area, of course this is important for the personal issue on the international basis, but we should think more, more elements, more, structural things beyond this. So if we put all the discussions within this kind of the personal issue of the kidnapping, something strange, something, different direction comes out. This is very dangerous because we,
Yeah, now the DPRK test launched ballistic missiles in August and in September that flew over Japan before falling into the Pacific Ocean. The Defense Ministry officials confirmed, however, that the altitude and speed of the missiles would have made it very difficult to destroy them in flight. But on his way to Japan, President Trump said, being a samurai country, Japan should have shot these missiles down. Professor Watanabe, do you think he understands the essence of the samurai spirit?
Mr. Trump said like that. However, scientifically and militarily, theory says it is so difficult to shoot down the missile flying. Actually, even in the drills, only 80% is successful. So actually, it is not so easy to shoot down the missiles flying over Japan. And so You see, the most important thing is to make the circumstances, the environment, not to launch missiles for the DPRK. This is more important. So we are, you see, facing, or we are forced to look at the different direction by Mr. Trump and Mr. Abe and other, you see, military, you see, weapon-loving people. I mean the military complexes. This is wrong.
Let's take a look at the trade issue between, that's also on the agenda of President Trump. Now, several countries, especially Japan, were upset when President Trump withdrew the U.S. from the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, a deal which had been more than 5 years in the making and affects some 40% of global trade. Now, the 11 remaining countries, including Japan and Vietnam, have said they will continue the pact and leave the door open for the U.S. to rejoin at any time. But President Trump has repeatedly said he won't change his mind. So, Mr. Sa, what would the U.S. think of a TPP led by Japan?
Well, I think that's really, regardless of how the United States feels, that's the only hope for the TPP, with Japan now being the largest economy in that trade agreement. I don't really think that it's a matter of Trump's personal feelings, because even if it changes, we've seen that he is a president who is to his core support base, and the Trans-Pacific Partnership was one of the whipping boys of the campaign season. It's one of the great evils that he was elected to fight against, and for him to change his mind and do a complete 180 and decide to push for joining the TPP, I just don't see that as a possibility. We've seen President Trump be very sensitive to poll numbers, and if anything that doesn't agree with him, he immediately denounces it as fake news, or that the poll numbers it's a giant conspiracy against him. And so we know that he is sensitive to public sentiments. We know he does his best to keep in touch with his core support and his voter base. And so I don't believe that the Trans-Pacific Partnership, in this administration anyway, there's really very little hope of the United States joining. So in order for this partnership to continue, and by some action of future administrations, of future American administrations, we're going to have Japan and some of the larger economies really take this trade agreement and keep it afloat.
Okay. President Trump also made some interesting comments regarding Japanese economy during the trip. Let's take a listen to this now.
The Japanese people are thriving. Your cities are vibrant, and you've built one of the world's most powerful economies. I don't know if it's as good as ours. I think not. Okay? And we're going to try and keep it that way. But you'll be second.
Of course, President Trump seems to be joking a little bit, but Professor Watanabe, what is your reaction to what President Trump said there, kind of jokingly dictating that Japan would be second and comparing Japanese economy to that of the U.S.? What is your take to all of this?
Mr. Trump, you see, he is proud of the American economy, and also he praises Japan and also China when he goes to Beijing. But frankly speaking, as a Japanese, we don't have so many things to buy from the United States, frankly speaking, except the military weapons. And as far as I know, all statistics of Japan says, when it comes to the automobiles, we need so many big number of the parts of the automobiles. However, we cannot, you see, get the good quality parts of the car in the States because the car industry in the States has been destroyed for the past 2 decades or so. So this is not so simple. Even when I take the example of the cars and others, you see, agricultural things, We can buy beef from Australia, New Zealand, like that. So TPP is okay. But when Mr. Trump says, you see, America first, he cannot come into the TPP. But Japan cannot, you see, leave the TPP. So Mr. Trump's idea will not be realized.
Professor Yang, 1 minute left. What is your take on this trade issue? Do you think right now this issue is standing in the way of the relationship between the two countries?
Well, in my observation, President Trump was successful in North Korean issue in the talks with Japan, but failed in trade with Japan simply because the two sides haven't resolved the differences on the format of the negotiation on dealing. In other words, Trump insists on bilateral and Japan hoped multilateral, and they haven't solved the difference, let alone the core difference on the trade individual issues.
Okay, thank you very much. We have to leave it there. Our guests have been Professor Takesato Watanabe, Professor Emeritus at Doshisha University, Harry H. Sa, a Senior Analyst in the United States Program at the Institute of Defense and Strategic Studies in Nanyang Technological University, and Professor Yang Xiyu, a Senior Fellow at the China Institute of International Studies. Now, after President Trump came into power, the isolationism that he advocated led to a visible decline of U.S. influence in the Asia-Pacific. But for Japan, which is dependent on the U.S., there is little choice but to strengthen its military alliance with that country. However, the next few stops for President Trump on this trip will not be as relaxing and cozy. Either the ROK or Vietnam or the Philippines will be wary of the U.S.'s strategy in the region. So far, however, that has been piecemeal. The talk of setting up a free and open Indo-Pacific sounds very much like a borrowed idea. Whatever the final wording of that strategy, analysts are worried of a Cold War-style confrontation in the region or an arms race as a potential consequence. That's it for this edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin. Before I go, here is how you can get your stories, comments and videos aired on our program. We will launch a special show on world poverty reduction in mid-November, and we need your input. When you hear the word poverty, what comes to your mind? If you have a question to ask, a comment to make, or a story to tell, send them to me via thepointwithLX@cgtn.com or share it on your Facebook or Twitter account using the hashtag #PovertyAndUs. Remember to tag me at thepointwithLX. Thanks for watching. You've got the point.